I feel anger. I feel angry in a way, but it's easy to turn anger into complacency, and I decided that I'm going to turn my anger into action.
Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you so much for joining us. Ray's Talk Show, whether we're talking politics or personal development, we are here to help you become more of the person you are meant to be. Thank you so much for joining us. You can catch all of Ray's Talk Show by downloading, subscribing to Ray's Talk Show on iTunes or anywhere you can find a podcast, and always check out all of our content at rayspodcast.com. That's RAYS podcast.com, and Ray's Podcast anywhere in social media, particularly on Twitter. Again, we appreciate you joining us. This is, we felt like we had to get a second episode out this week because, as you all know, it's unbelievable. It's only been 3 weeks. There's just so much going on. And so we felt compelled to have some more voices get engaged in this conversation. Later on in the show, you're going to hear from Patricia Campos. Patricia is one of the top political analysts that we have around the country. She teaches labor leadership, labor studies at Cornell University, as well as runs her own political consulting firm. And she's just going to talk to us about her reflections, where we're at as a progressive movement, as working people, and as people that many of you that are listening to this episode are sort of getting involved in advocacy and politics in a way that maybe you haven't since college or maybe never have. So how we all get engaged regardless of our experience in politics, and how we and some of the tools, particularly for women, that Patricia is offering with her various organizations and support groups, through training, through consulting, through advocacy, that that will give us the tools to get more engaged in this process. So listen out for Patricia's comments in a moment, and we're also discussing education, and specifically the recent confirmation of Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, very controversial, historic in how tight it was, literally a tie in the Senate that Vice President Pence had to break for her to be formally confirmed. And we're going to hear from educator and activist Shirley Santos. Shirley's a school teacher in a inner city district in New Jersey, as well as very involved in her local teachers union and involved in many other projects. And she's going to discuss with us from the perspective of an activist and a teacher her thoughts on this confirmation. She's not too happy about it, as you can imagine, and what she feels, more importantly, we need to focus on, not only holding the new Secretary of Education accountable, but also advocating for our children's education across the board. And she's got many thoughts about that. It was another great conversation that you'll hear as part of this episode of Ray's Talk Show. And later on at the show, my comments on tonight, as we're taping this moments ago, the Ninth Circuit Federal Court in San Francisco, 3-0, as Secretary Clinton, former presidential candidate Clinton, just tweeted out moments ago. Again, continued to block President Trump's executive order on a travel ban from people from 7 Muslim countries. So what that means for our politics, what that means for our movement, Resist is working on many levels, and I have some thoughts about that at the end of the show. But first, I'd like to talk about Guadalupe Garcia de Rayos. Guadalupe is a 35-year-old working woman, mother, wife, out of Phoenix, Arizona. She's been here for 22 years. She got here as a teenager to the United States and was arrested in 2008 for having working with a fake Social Security number. The deal that was struck with INS, because she was not a priority for deportation. She wasn't really a criminal. She had never sold any drugs. She had never been violent. She was just a working person who was working in this country and living in this country and contributing to this country. She just didn't have the right paperwork for a few of those things. And so the deal that INS struck with her was, look, you come in and check in with us every year. We make sure you're still in the straight and narrow, as you would imagine, and you'll be okay. You're not a priority for deportation. Well, yesterday she did her yearly check-in in Phoenix, Arizona, and she never got back to her family. You may have seen on the news last night when it became apparent that she wasn't going to be released after what she would have thought would have been another routine check-in with INS. Organically, a pretty significant amount of people blocked the vehicle that she was in that presumably was going to take her to either a detention facility or deport her. Ultimately, the police and law enforcement was brought in to get the protesters out of the way, and ultimately, and then we didn't know for a while where she was, and ultimately we found out less than 24 hours later, her family was informed that she was already on the other side of the border and was deported back to Nogales in the state of Sonora, Mexico. And so, this has caused a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of sadness in many parts of our country, and particularly amongst people that care about immigrants and people, regardless of their status, socioeconomic or anyway in our society. And so the first thing that comes to mind is, besides just your heart goes out for this family, seems to be a very cohesive, closely knit family. Her husband, teenage children, particularly her daughter, who's 14, has been separated from her mother for no good reason. Regardless, even if you get beyond your political opinions about it, the purpose, supposed purpose of President Trump's philosophy as it relates to these immigration policies is to make us safer. And so I ask you, what about sending this woman, breaking this woman apart from her family, her daughter? As her older son said, I'm basically college age. It's my little sister that really needs mom right now more than ever, more than anybody. What about this makes any of us safer? And for those that say, well, the rule, the sticklers for the rules argument. Well, technically she wasn't supposed to be here, and technically she used a fake Social Security number. I'll say this: that I would ask those same people, how many times have you driven after 2 beers? Or how many times have you smoked weed? Or lent someone that was a little down and about the rest of a prescription drug, a couple pills in a bottle that you weren't going to use anymore. You figured, they could use it to go to bed or make them feel better about themselves, or calm down. Have you ever fudged on your taxes? Sped in a car? Maybe roughed somebody up in a bar after a few drinks? The reality is, y'all, you can criminalize anyone for almost anything. And so we see that with the explosion of people being largely African-American males in this country that have been thrust into the prison system in this country. You see it again and again. People that had been vetted and had gone through every legal hoop and to be vetted in this country, had legal documentation, had green cards, had visas. Even small children went from just being joined with loved ones after getting off a long plane flight to being detained and in many cases 2 weeks ago put on a plane back to their country. So I think Ray Maldonado, the lawyer for the Garcias, said it best when he said at a press conference earlier today. President Trump's calling these executive orders that'll enhance quote-unquote public safety, which really appears only to be attacking immigrant communities and people of color. And so again, I ask, when you think about a president that lauds and certainly doesn't have seemingly anything bad to say about the Russian President Vladimir Putin, probably one of the 5 worst human beings in the world, one of the most evil, mean leaders we've seen in recent history in the world. And he has nothing to say bad about him, but there's the willingness and almost the thirst to punish, to be cruel to brown people, whether they're from the Middle East or Latin America, or in this case, Phoenix, Arizona. I would just ask everyone listening to this, regardless of your political disposition, what is this really about? And let's just be honest about it. Guadalupe Garcia, we are with you and your entire family. And rest assured that we will continue on your behalf and on the behalf of families that have already been torn apart and may, if we're not continue to be diligent, may be torn apart in the coming days, weeks, and months. We will continue to resist. Let's now listen to my conversation earlier today with a political analyst and a tremendous advocate for our community, Patricia Campos. Welcome back to Ray's Talk Show. This is your host, Ray Collazo. Thank you again for joining us. And, you know, during these challenging times, when I want to get grounded, when I want to understand that everything's going to be okay, I turn to particularly the Latina leaders in this country who I feel more than ever before we need to elevate and provide the space to have they have even larger platforms to impact our nation and more people because they're the true leaders of our community. And one of the people that embodies that spirit for me is a political strategist and someone that has a particular expertise around social justice and labor rights is Patricia Campos. Patricia, it's been way too overdue, this conversation. Welcome finally to Ray's Talk Show.
Oh, thank you, Ray. Such a privilege to be here with you. I know that have been doing a great job with this.
And Patricia, thank you so much, Patricia. And Patricia, amongst many titles, is the co-director of the Worker Institute at Cornell University, as well as the president and CEO of Campos Strategies, a political consulting firm that has unique expertise in engaging diverse voters. So, Patricia, first of all, I just want to hear where your head's at. I just wanted to, if you could share with our listeners someone that has been, who has dedicated their life to social justice, labor rights, the rights of immigrants, and particularly working people that deserve equal opportunity in this country. Just how are you feeling, and what should we be thinking about in this moment in history here?
Well, I feel, I think it would be easier to feel. I feel anger. I feel angry in a way, but it's easy to turn anger into complacency, and I decided that I'm going to turn my anger into action because I feel that it is up to us to change the dynamics of our society that got us to where we are today. So, after, as an activist, and thank you for describing me as a social activist, because that's how I describe myself. I do politics, I do labor organizing, I do community organizing, but at the end of the day, I truly believe in social activism, and that is people who make any community great and make any country great and make this country great. So I'm feeling actually energized, and that we have an opportunity now that turn people that have been complacent about where things were going and turn them around and help them find a way to channel their energy into change. The Chinese have a saying that in every, whenever there's a challenge, there's also, whenever there is a moment so dramatic in time, there's also risk and there's also opportunity. So I think we should take this as an opportunity to drive our agenda forward and just reclaim our place in this United States of America. So I'm hopeful and I'm energized.
No, absolutely. And so, thinking about, I think about the Women's March, and I think about the subsequent actions. The truly the people that were just so considerate and loving, and I think about it in those terms. The people that were at those airports simply asking for people to be reunited with loved ones who had done everything that the federal government asked them to do to be properly vetted and enter the United States. And I just think about how, these challenges are presenting, are putting people in a lot of personal crossroads. Like there's people
Exactly.
that like ourselves that are dedicating our lives to it, and now we're trying to figure out how to collaborate and come out of this stronger. But there's a larger group of people that have never, maybe they voted, maybe they paid attention, but they've never gone to marches. They've never been so engaged in wanting to do stuff. So, and we're going to talk about some of
Yeah.
the next
Yeah.
steps that you're involved in a little bit. But
Yeah.
just for those people that are like, wow, I have a kind of a quote unquote regular job, and I live kind of a regular life, and now I'm really angry, and particularly I think there's a lot of women, and particularly a lot of Latinas that really want that have a real thirst to do something about it. What would be your, before we get into some of the practical things you're doing, what would just be your first piece of advice to them?
Well, I think what we saw with the election of Donald Trump was a backlash against politics as usual, and people that felt that didn't come out or vote or were not engaged, perhaps were thinking nothing changes if I get engaged. And people on the other side, on the right, conservative side, they actually were engaged for the last 15 years locally to drive their vision of what America should look like. And I think us on the progressive side, we sort of got a little bit complacent with the system and thinking that somebody else will take the baton. So I think that what if you were one of those people that were complacent that thought, oh, I mean, I just gotta work hard, I take care of my kids, and I just want to do what's right for me. And now you're seeing how things have changed, and you want to get active. I think there's so many things that we can do locally to get engaged. I mean, you see, not just from the big marches, which I think were great, and the protests at the airport, which I think is awesome, but also you see locally. At my local congressman office, I mean, 200, 300 people show up every Wednesday for Motor Wednesdays rallies. People are making calls to the offices expressing their opinion. You can do that from your home. You get up in the morning before you go to school, call your office, send an email, and say, "Oh, this is what I want you to do because you're my congressman." So there's a lot of things that you can do. Go to your local community meeting. Locally here, we have what's called the Indivisibles that we are putting together, just community people that are going to get together in homes and perhaps write letters or send emails or make phone calls just to make sure that our voices, as progressive, not just as Democrats, but as progressives, get heard on issues that matter, like public education. We're going to have our hands full with the new Secretary of Education. I mean, I have kids in school; they're in first grade, and I'm gonna make sure that I am in my school in my PTA meetings, and I'm talking to the superintendent because I am concerned about what my education for my children are gonna look like as they grow up. So I think that we just have to wrap around, what is it that I want my community to look like, and how can I plug into those actions.
And the good news for people that feel like, wow, it's so overwhelming. Yeah, maybe I make a call or maybe I do emails, but trying to impact a senator
So
or
many
even a
issues.
congressperson
Yeah.
seems a little overwhelming. But the good news is that where we need the most energy, particularly for the mid to long term, is on more of a local level. One of the reasons we got into this mess, and Patricia sort of alluded to it, is that the '08 election was, well, it was so historic and such a tipping point for so many of us. And I think you would agree, Patricia, we probably never felt more American with the election of President Obama. And then one of the things that the Republicans did, particularly the guys that the people that are really kind of not out for our best interest, our community's best interest, and really equality for everybody, is that they turned to the states and very methodically worked on controlling state houses, governorships. And then after that census in 2010 really tilted the federal makeup of Congress and as well as the state legislative makeups of these states in a way that, even in the best case scenarios makes it very challenging for us to have particularly, a more progressive Congress, but even more importantly, one would argue, progressive state legislators and state governments. So these are so those state legislative, state senate, that level of organizing if you get an
Matters.
extra 500 people out, 1,000 people out, that can make a tremendous difference in your community, in your state. And we're going to talk about in a little bit with Patricia Campos, how you can get even more involved in some of the trainings and some of the opportunities she's involved in to get you some more practical skills around being involved in partisan politics. But before I get to that, I just had a couple of strategic questions, Patricia, because I think you're really in the nexus of this, and I'm curious about what you have to say about it. One of the things we're going to need to do is balance. One would argue, sort of balance maintaining this organic energy, which is very organic, which is not something the Democratic Party is controlling. Unlike what Trump says, these are not paid protesters. This is something that's happening, even beyond ideology. Just something that people are doing out of concerns for the future of this country as a democracy, frankly, and certainly one that's just.
I think that what people are missing, I totally agree with you. This is organic. People are feeling energized on their own. I think there's a little level of party politics, but we will not be able to transform this society in this country just relying on the Democratic Party. We have to, as citizens, we have to lay out our vision of what we want our communities to look like and fight for that. So it's a resistance. It's the sense that I will not accept the America that Donald Trump is painting for me. And I'm going to show up at my local school. I'm going to show up to my local congressman's office. I'm going to show up to a local rally. And nobody's organizing that. And that's exciting to me. That there's that's when movements happen, when people on their own take action. And we just have to keep feeding that as activists, as organizers. We just have to keep feeding that and not ignore political electoral politics, because I think that we need to channel some of that energy into taking back our government so that it works for people. But we have to say, no, we are not an arm of the Democratic Party. We are an arm of people who have values, that everybody's equal and everybody deserves an opportunity in this country, because that's what we were built on. So that's exciting to me. I think it's a real movement for change, a real resistance that is out there.
And, you just spoke to something that's very important, because there's lots to do, right? So even if you're someone out there that's like, well, the partisan politics thing is not my thing. I want to make a difference. I believe in these ideals, but that's not an area where I feel I'm going to make the most impact. There's all kinds of opportunities, whether it's volunteering or being on the board of a community organization that does that works with immigrant communities, or that that does a wide variety of social services for all kind of people. There's all, whether your concern is the environment, tax policy, whatever it is, this is something that there's all kind of ways you can get engaged, and like you said, Patricia, this is you're going to have more. There's an energy here where you're going to find a lot of like-minded people, no matter what your particular focus is. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, Patricia, was this question around, framing this around economics. And so you as your role many years as one of the top Latina labor leaders in the country, with your various roles in this work, and now the work you're doing in teaching people how to organize themselves through your role at Cornell University, your alma mater, is that, there's a discussion taking place around, and one of the things I'm concerned about is that how do we do this in a way that truly does bring the people together that are feeling the same concerns? So there's been a lot of concern and empathy and conversation in the mainstream media about, does this affect working class white person in the North? And I agree that that's an area that, frankly, both political parties and political elites have arguably forgotten about. But my response to that is, we absolutely should engage them and make them feel more comfortable in this larger movement. But at the same time, that doesn't take away from not only the humanity, but the plight, our economic plight as working people that live in inner cities or people of color. So what are because you're in the middle of that, and you've struggled with those, so what are your thoughts about bridging those gaps from an organizing perspective?
I think that one of the worst mistakes that we can do as organizers, as progressives, is to demonize all those people that voted for what they thought was a response to their understanding of what their reasons for their economic crisis is. We do have an economic crisis where income inequality is going up, the middle class is shrinking, and millionaires are, they're getting fewer and fewer billionaires in our country, and they are fueling this sense that, things are not happening and it's the fault of the government. When in fact, those same billionaires and the billionaire class has been pressuring and destroying government and basically drying it out of money. But I don't want to get into that discussion because I think that gets complicated. So what I want to say is that those people, the middle class, that were middle class, that basically saw their economic livelihood destroyed in the middle of America because jobs left, because their factory closed, because they lost their house that they had worked their whole lives for. Those are real economic crises that people are facing. And they, Trump was a master at inciting their economic anxiety. I don't believe as a labor organizer that he has an answer for that economic anxiety because he's just fueling it as a way for him to get into office. Because what we need to transform the economic reality of working people is an increase on earnings of people. People need to earn. That's why we support the 5 for 15 because that should be the minimum wage. People need to have the ability to have jobs that have health care that they can provide for their families, and they need to have a right to join unions so that they can have a voice at the workplace. That's what we need, and that he will not offer those things. So the worst thing we can do is to attack and demonize the working class people who voted for Trump. What we need to do as good organizers is to start talking to them as to why is it that the economy has worked for millionaires and it hasn't worked for working people? Why is it that we say the banks and we didn't say people's mortgages? And why is it that that governments are shrinking their budgets every year while corporations like Walmart, gets benefits from people depending on welfare? Because if they don't pay enough wages, they just keep it all for profit. So I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to start having, rather than calling all people who support Trump as racist and as ignorant, because that is just sort of doesn't get us anywhere. And I think there is a level of racism, but racism, remember, is a tool to keep working people from finding their commonalities, which is where they are in their communities. So I think we just need to reframe the discussion around what is it that we want in this country. We want good jobs. We all want good jobs. And what does it mean to have a good job? How can we work? How can we have that conversation?
And one of the things that we need to, you're absolutely right, Patricia, and one of the things that we need to, and I don't know exactly how to do it other than just be honest and continue to have these reach out to people, is that my sense, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm on to something to some degree, is that those same people that have that anxiety, they've been convinced as part of this, our community being demonized and this divisiveness and this sales job that Trump gave to them, and quite honestly, Republicans have given to them for a long time. I mean, they've been breaking up unions in Wisconsin and Michigan, all these places for quite some time. Is that this is like the culmination of it, right? The cherry on the top in the Midwest is that that this is a zero-sum game. That on some level there's an underlying sentiment that there's only so many resources, and every middle class Latino takes away from a white person in my community that could become middle class. So there's only so many jobs, there's so much money. And in fact, we know from, any basic understanding of the federal budget and the kind of economy the United States has, is that there's plenty of money for everybody. So, and it goes back to this question of, what really are our priorities as a country from a policy perspective, and getting labor to be the labor movement and organized unions to be not a dwindling factor in our economics, but a more powerful factor is a big part of that. And we see, there's rumors that right to work is it may be floated as a
Might,
federal policy. So that's
yeah, might
the
become,
labor
yes.
piece of this is very important. So
Yeah. Well, I think that so that we don't go into a moment of despair. I think it's always good to look at history, and in the areas in not just in our short history of the United States, but in countries like Latin America, in Brazil that had to in South Africa that had to go through a period of very tough societal upheaval, that the working class, and whether it's organized into formal unions or not, it's always has the ability to fight back and to organize. And I think that being having worked for the formal organized labor for such a long time and understanding organized labor's own challenges, which is that we failed to organize other sectors of the economy when manufacturing jobs left. So I think that labor is sort of one of those institutions that sort of gives substance to other social movements, but it's not the only movement out there. I mean, we have great organizations doing great work to represent workers and defend workers and organize them, like the National Day Laborers Network and the lawn. We have the Worker Centers Associations in New York City, in Los Angeles, in Texas. We have the community groups organizing nannies and organizing people who take care of older people. I mean, we have so much activity at the grassroots level for people, for workers to have a voice, which is not necessarily with institutional labor, because our labor laws that protect union organizers have been gutted. It's very difficult for a low wage worker right now to organize under the traditional National Labor Relations Board process. So we have to be creative about how we organize workers, even outside of the National Labor Relations Board. So I think understanding that dynamics, that workers and communities will always find a way to defend their gains that they have made, and that we have to be conscious that things that worked for us 20 years ago might not work today, and we have to be creative. So I think we have to look at places like Brazil when they transform, and Brazil transformed in the last 20 years. I think they're going also through a lot of change right now, but they have a whole history of workers organizing and taking over the government. I mean, the movement in South Africa to change apartheid. I think we just have to realize that what America is going through is not new. It has happened to other countries, and that we can go back to like talking to our neighbors and our community, and that we can change the dynamics in this country again. So let's take energy from our people that had been through this economic pressure before. In back in Latin America, in Africa,
Yeah, no, and Patricia, when you say that, I think about, and this is even pre-Trump, the movement that's been taking place that hasn't got nearly enough attention, that's been led, pretty heavily with women of color around, developing these, like you said, these alternative creative models to organize lower wage workers and people that quite honestly are the forgotten oftentimes in society. The work that like Ai Po has done with domestic workers, the work that our dear colega Alilia Mejia has done in New Jersey around organizing to get city ordinances for municipalities in New Jersey to have paid sick leave legislation. So the good news is that these are models that quite honestly one of the dirty secrets of mainstream labor traditionally has been it really has been a tool mostly for men and in the workforce. Yeah. And really white men, and so there are networks that Patricia is referring to of women and women of color, more specifically, that are organizing themselves that we can already plug into. They already exist, oftentimes, and getting a ordinance passed so that lower wage workers can have sick days, earn sick days, to take their child to with their Obamacare or CHIP or what have you to That's just smart policy, and that's stuff that we
Yeah.
can work on, and
Yeah.
we've already seen wins. You know.
Yes, exactly. And I think this whole movement with the 5 or 15, I think when it started, it was just workers, regular workers, and people thought, oh, $15 an hour if you're earning 7.15, oh, that's never gonna happen. And now it's like the standard demand, and we have been able to get it done in different communities. So it just have to we just have to figure out and have a vision of what we want. This country to look like and just drive towards that. So there's so many things that we can get involved in, and people who are listening to this podcast, you know, just try to plug in. Try to plug in the issues that you care about. We don't all have to be working on everything or on the same things. We all have to be working on something because that's how you change your community. If all of us make it a point to work on something that we deeply care about, and we will move the debate forward.
And you're listening to Patricia Campos, for my money, one of the top political strategists, particularly in the areas of social justice and labor rights in the country. She's the co-director of the Worker Institute at Cornell University and the president and CEO of Campos Strategies. Patricia, before we let you go, I wanted to make sure, you're as part of what you're doing every day to empower people, particularly women. You're involved in lots of programming coming up and events related to empowering women to get more involved in the political process, even running for office. So why don't you share with people some of the work you're doing in that area and how people can plug into some of these activities you're involved in coming up?
Most definitely. One of the many hats that we wear, and women, we wear many hats because that's just the way things are for us. One of the hats is I'm the president of Lupe PAC, which is Latinas United for Political Empowerment. It's the political arm. And I'm also a board member for Poder PAC, which is the National Latina PAC. And what we try to do is raise money and support Latinas who want to run for office. I am a political consultant and a leadership development specialist with the Worker Institute, Union Leadership Institute. So I sort of combine my passion of labor organizing with leadership development with developing Latina women to run for office. It's sort of like the best of all my passions. And we have partnered up with the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University in New Brunswick to have this 3-day seminar, which is part of the Ready to Run national program to train women to run for office. And our goal is to empower women that care about making change locally and they have an inkling to be a public servant, to understand what it takes to run for office. The number one impediment for women to run for elected office is that nobody asks them to. And, in New Jersey, we have a very male-dominant county-control political parties. And most men ask other men to run for office when an opening exists. They don't think about asking a woman. So what we tell women is that if you want to run, do not wait to be asked. You have to say, I want to run because I can do this job. And that's a very difficult thing for women to do because we want to do things and be recognized for the work that we do. We don't want to be we sort of want hide from saying I can do this. So I think as women we have to take ownership of what we want and then just ask for it. So then we go through a whole training about how to fundraise, how to navigate the political system, and then how to put a political plan. So I'll invite you all to register the next for this training. The next one is coming up March 9th, right here in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And for those of you who do not have 3 days to go to a training, we are also partnering up with Latino Vote for a training. It's a webinar to give you a sense of what you need to do to run for office. And that is, I think it's a small charge. It's not charged because it's a webinar. But if you want to just get a sense of what it will look like, join us on that webinar on Saturday, February 11th. And you can go to the Facebook page of Lupe PAC, and you can get the details for that webinar in there.
Excellent. And we will have links. We will have links in the show notes, which you'll be able to find at rayspodcast.com, which will have links to all of the activities and organizations that Patricia is referring to. And I encourage you. Patricia is not hard to find on social media, so you can definitely reach out to her, and she'll make sure you get plugged into the appropriate.
Can I just plug in another training?
You can talk about whatever. You can plug whatever you want, Patricia.
The New Jersey Working Families Organization, which is led by our dear friend Ana Lilia Mejia, is actually doing these trainings all over New Jersey to help you become a better community organizer. Running for office is one way to be active, but how do you organize others around you to join the resistance and the movement? That's what those trainings are going to be about. So, you can also go to the New Jersey Working Families website, and you can get all the details for their Resistencia trainings that they're holding all over the state.
Oh, that is excellent. I need to reach out to Ana Lilia because I want to see how I can support her with that and get her on the show to discuss it. That's a fantastic.
Yes.
She's excellent. She's excellent. And, we support particularly anything Patricia, whether it's her association with her sorority, her dear Land of Pi Chi sisters, her being one of our top El Salvadoran American community leaders. I'm actually one of our Vegas. It's amazing, Patricia. We're talking one of our Vegas El Salvadoran leaders is texting me from Las Vegas about an activity we're doing. So it's almost like he knew we were talking. You're involved in some excellent networks. And Patricia, any final words for our Race Talk Show audience? I know Andrew Pudster, we still have a Department of Labor secretary that's may or may not be in the mix, and he's in the headlines. There's a lot people can plug into. So any other final thoughts for our listeners, and also let people know where they can find you on social media?
The only thing that I would tell everybody who's just feeling overwhelmed with all this attack is that let's not lose hope, and then just connect to each other and connect to people like you who want to make a difference, and just seek out a way to channel your frustration into some positive change. There's so many things that you can do, and we need you. We need every ounce of energy that you have to give to the movement to resist. Not just to resist Trump, but to change where America is going, because we're the ones that we've been waiting for. So we got to make it happen.
That's right. And
in terms of finding me on social media and on Facebook, Patricia Campos, or you can find me on Twitter at P Campos Medina.
And if you're someone that's looking to run for office, or someone that's listening to this that's looking for consultation for political experts like Patricia, she's also available for that. So definitely feel free to reach out to Patricia in her various roles. Patricia, I say it every time I can publicly. You're one of the best folks we have, and I'm so proud to be associated with you. And our association means a lot to me personally. And everybody knows in this podcast, you and I go back to like DC days. Like, absolutely. When you
when
we worked for LACLA, and then our social networks overlap quite a bit from the college years. So lots of connections here. And again, look forward to continue these conversations. You've been listening to Patricia Campos, the co-director of the Worker Institute at Cornell University and the president and CEO of Campos Strategies. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Ray.
We couldn't let the week go by without talking to one of our Latina educators, not just about the unfortunate confirmation of Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, but just kind of thinking ahead about what we should be thinking about as advocates for the education of our children. And who better than a great friend of the podcast and the pride of Vineland, New Jersey? Yes, for you people outside of the Northeast, Vineland is where it's at. And a very great friend to the podcast, Shirley Santos. Shirley, welcome. I think it's your first time. This is well overdue, Shirley.
It is well overdue. Absolutely.
I've been on your radio shows over the years. Shirley
yes,
is a
you
great
have. Yes,
podcaster
you have.
in her own right. So, and we need her podcasting for sure. So Shirley's got a lot of affiliations. She's very involved. She's one of our Latina super women. But the thing that's most relevant to this conversation is that Shirley Santos is a first-grade bilingual school teacher in Vineland and a very decorated teacher. So, Shirley, again, welcome to the show. And I know you just got out of a meeting to talk about this, but I just wanted to get you to share your reactions, your reflections on this confirmation of Betsy DeVos to be our Secretary of Education.
Well, first of all, I have to say thank you for the opportunity to reach out to all your audience tonight. What can I say about DeVos's confirmation? I'm extremely disappointed, but I have to be honest with you. I expected it. I mean, ever since Trump took office, a lot of things have been happening very quickly. And I know that the Republicans are sticking to their agenda. And unfortunately, we should not be expecting anybody from the Republican Party to stand up for what is right, and that's very unfortunate. With Betsy DeVos's background, we all know that she has a heavy spending record on right-wing causes. And, she has spent, her and her family have spent over $200 million. And so right off the bat, with that kind of record, we in the education field already knew that she was the worst choice ever. And, couple that with the lack of experience in public schools and her absolute no knowledge of policy, educational policy is really, really sad. And it saddens me because I would think that, people in the Republican Party would be able to use common sense and realize that this person is not the right person to head the education department. But like I said, there's no people of courage, in my opinion, in that party anymore, and they're just going to fall in rank and file with Trump's agenda. And, of course, DeVos, with her big support for vouchers and for private religious schools, is one of the things that has everybody in the education field very concerned at this point. So I can tell you I'm extremely disappointed, but not surprised.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because the utter lack of experience and qualifications for the job. Of course, a philanthropist, someone has thrown some money around and gotten pretty involved on the politics of expanding, or really, diminishing public education in this country with charter schools and vouchers for access. Taking those resources out of public school into parochial systems and other alternative schools. But it's interesting because, and we'll talk about the equity piece in a minute, but with my day job, Shirley, we were feeding, I don't know if I'll talk about this, but we were feeding the Senate Democrat, the committee members questions about Latino education issues, which I want to ask you about, because you actually know what you're talking about. I think people would certainly benefit from your wisdom on these things. And then, when we asked them, well, how come you never got to ask them during the hearings? And they said, well, to be honest with you, she didn't even know the basics. So when you have to discuss, the difference between proficiency and growth, and so we couldn't even get to the issues, those more specifics, because she couldn't even answer the very basic questions. And there's lots of ethical issues if people are picking up. And there's so many issues with this woman, but that there was one that I was particularly concerned about as it related to. I mean, it seemed that she was a board member of a group that had funded basically anti-LGBT causes. And then she basically just said, well, I'm not on that board. And they said, well, your name's on all the tax documents as the vice chair of the group. And then she was like, no, that was just a mistake. Billionaires don't make mistakes on their taxes. So they make sure their name's not on things if it's not supposed to be. So lots of issues there. So Shirley, as an educator and someone that's involved in your local teachers union, and a lot of, if you're not an educator or involved in education, it's hard to kind of gauge what the Secretary of Education does. So Shirley, what are you most concerned about that DeVos can do that can impact our community negatively in this role?
Well, listen, there's a couple of things. One of the things that I'm most concerned about is, of course, the privatization of education. And even though she really can't do anything from the federal level, unless, of course, and that's why I say unless, of course, Trump has an opportunity to kind of pass some kind of, I don't know, maybe through an executive order to have school choice. And then that would open the door for her to really do some kind of national sort of, voucher program, or perhaps pass some kind of special tax in which people can, donate money to scholarship funds for their kids, and they would get some kind of tax break of some sort. There has been talk of that. I've read, extensively on some of those issues. And, the interesting thing about passing this tax credit program is that it's already exists in 17 states. But if he were to do like I said, some kind of executive order to have it on a national level, then I think that would open the door for her to then be able to pass some policy about vouchers, across the nation. We know that Trump in his plan already wants to designate $20 billion for vouchers. So that's where it would be interesting to see how they would combine their efforts to change educational policy. And, there's so many other worries with the IDEA law. Is she going to, promote, along with the vouchers, the opportunities for parents to opt out of services, and how nonprofits, charter schools that are for profit then, will be able to proliferate in our states, in our educational system. And, I'm very concerned with the budgets. Right now we have so many districts who are struggling with their budgets, who are getting ready to begin a budget process, and, they're in a deficit, and they're trying to find ways to keep schools open and keep teachers employed, and, offer the kids all the services that, we need to provide for them. Because let's face it, public schools don't get to choose who they're going to teach. It's not like, these voucher programs and these private schools, and, who get to choose who they want to teach. We have to teach every student that walks through that door and offer them the services that they need. And,
Yeah, and there's a lot here. So Shirley's touching on a few really critical things. So obviously, while ultimate, from a day-to-day policy perspective, states and local school districts have, tend to have more control than other systems like healthcare. So, HHS and other federal agencies kind of have more direct oversight. But, there's always things the federal government can do, incentives. And, when you start throwing money around, all kind of entities start experimenting. And again, we have 39 Republican governors in this country. So, there's going to be a lot of states that are going to be willing to accept resources to try some of these things. It'll be interesting to see from a Latino perspective. Shirley, that, look, there is interest in, from a theoretical perspective in these alternative options as it relates to, whether it's charter schools and vouchers, which, a lot of our faith, our Christian and Catholic families, that's a very attractive option. If you knock on your average Latino door and say, hey, if I gave you a voucher, would you send your kid to Catholic school? There's probably a lot of people that would be open to that,
Right. The interesting thing is they promote it as school choice. So every time you promote something like that, it sounds like a very positive thing. The issue that I have is that, and I'm talking more about private charters, like I'm for public charters, of course, but private charters that are for profit, the ones that DeVos headed in Michigan.
Very top down, very profit oriented, very white.
Absolutely.
Big gap in cultural competency they tend to. Not like your community charter schools, and there's a lot of those that we associate with that are sort of more organic. They're locally based. They tend to be led in the Latino community. They tend to be led by Latino educators that have experience in this community. a whole different vibe. Yeah, for sure.
It's a whole different thing. And I think that's the greatest concern. And I understand, it is true that, in education it's a little different because our local school boards have a lot of control, and states can do a lot of things to stop these things from coming into our states. But here's my concern, and it has to do with the way Trump governs. You have seen how, the travel ban was implemented. It's just chaos. And even though there's laws in place, I really don't have the trust in this administration to do things the right way. So I'm vigilant. Okay, I know we have some things in place to protect us, the law, and we always have the courts, et cetera, to take our our issues to them if we feel that our rights are being violated. But I just don't have the confidence in this administration that they're going to do the right thing. So, like I started saying before, nothing surprises me. So that's where I'm at right now. As a matter of fact, you mentioned that I just came from a meeting at NJEA, and it's really interesting. We are beginning to organize specifically for the needs of our immigrant parents and families in our district. And we have created, sort of like a movement in which we are going to be going into our communities, talking to our parents about their rights. Because, some people think that immigrants do not have rights. And, especially the undocumented immigrants that live in our communities. And we met and we have some plans in place. As a matter of fact, I may need your services. We'll see. But, it's geared towards creating a community opportunity to talk to our parents and let them know that we are with them every single step of the way, and that there are some things that we can do to protect them. Give them orientation as to how to deal with ICE. What is you don't have to open the door. You don't have to answer questions, little things like that. And just letting them know that, their children are safe in our schools and that we're going to do everything we can to protect them.
That speaks to another a part of this that's a particular concern to Latino advocates, which is this issue of equity, right? Because you not only have, part of, now this is a general statement, but for people listening to this, your traditional suburban upper class or relatively upper class school districts and school systems, and even on the parent level, sometimes sort of resist federal engagement around education issues because there's a general sense that, we know what we're doing. Our schools are good schools, unlike the schools, why don't you deal with the schools that have problems? They tend to enjoy their autonomy. On the flip side, this again is a general statement, but this is for the, that particularly Latino activists and civil rights activists have welcomed at oftentimes federal engagement, because even school districts that generally perform stronger, unless there's that oversight, unless there's that accountability, unless there's the resources there, that doesn't mean that the Latino kid in that school district or the black kid in that school district are getting the kind of resources and are getting the kind of support to perform at comparable levels. And then when you get into school districts that have more challenges because they don't have the same tax base, they have kids with various needs around language and community integration and all that stuff. So, and again, we just went through an issue, and Shirley, we haven't had a chance to talk about it, and we'll talk about it on future shows. But, we're still in the middle of ESSA implementation, which is the sort of new federal, education legislation that passed, I guess, about a year and a half ago now, as it relates, sort of taking the place of No Child Left Behind, which, we all worked very hard on to do the best we could to ensure that, accountability measures as it related to dealing with all children, regardless of race, ethnicity, and language access, language capability, were treated fairly. So, one of our concerns, as you can imagine, if they're talking about limiting the budget. I mean, there was a Republican even proposed in Congress that they just get rid of the Department of Education.
I
So
know.
assuming
I did see that.
so what does that mean? Where's our watchdog? If a school district or a state, just kind of ignores or doesn't take into account counting for themselves around taking care of our kids. And then the piece you just spoke about, Shirley, which is an obvious concern, which is, how welcomed are immigrant children going to be in our, many of which are citizens, regardless of their parents.
Oh, absolutely.
But immigrants or, the children of immigrants, how are they going to be felt? How are they going to be engaged? How are they going to be treated in our schools, much less our society moving forward? So I know, especially as a bilingual teacher, Shirley, these are issues that you're engaged with every day, and I know our concerns of yours as we continue with the Trump administration.
Absolutely. Let me tell you, I can tell you stories. After Trump won the election, my students walked in on the Monday morning asking me what happened because they never voted for Trump. We had elections in our classroom. And, of course, they're first graders. They don't understand much about the process, but they felt like, he wasn't the right person to win. And I can tell you stories, how many of them said to me, with tear-eyed, they were worried. One asked me, are they going to come and get me here? Is my family going to have to leave United States? Am I going to be able to stay here? And to hear, first graders who should be more concerned about reading and writing and math talk to you about their fears of, being deported, because even though the majority of them are citizens, they are very aware that, if their families get deported, they are going with them. Because of course they don't want to leave they don't want to stay if they can't be with their family. So they're very aware of that. And it took me at least a week to to help them feel that everything was going to be okay. They walked every day with worries. I had some of them crying because, of course their parents are at work and they would be worried, what if I come home and they're not there? I mean, these are real concerns that these students have. And, I am so glad that I'm part of a union and an organization like NJEA that really, is aware of what's going on, but is willing to put their, best foot forward to really, address these issues, because these are the children we teach every day, and their concerns are our concerns. We cannot teach kids who are traumatized or worried about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, no, and that's talk about the human impact and people, really thinking about what this really means and this rhetoric, right? And it impacts children's education, it impacts their health, it impacts their, socialization. I mean, it's to be stigmatized is terrible.
Absolutely.
And people just don't realize that, they make these statements and they have these ideologies and they don't they're just not taking into account what that really means to real people. And you're listening to Shirley Santos, educator and a great friend to the show, great advocate. She's involved in all kinds of things between her education advocacy and a lot of the community work you're involved with down in Vineland, New Jersey and South Jersey, roughly halfway between Atlantic City and Philadelphia for folks that are curious about the geography. And a great place to get a good Puerto Rican meal and a good Italian meal. So a lot of for the foodies. If you're ever rolling down in South Jersey, look for Vineland. Shirley, I wanted to ask you,
a great place.
Absolutely. Been there often. But I wanted to ask you, Shirley, just sort of as a hypothetical, because we need to get back to thinking about what are the real priorities. So if you were the Secretary of Education, or when you become the Secretary of Education in your career journey,
wow.
what do you think should be the priority? In terms of, from your perspective as a teacher on the elementary school level and an activist,
I'm going to tell you right
think?
now. I'm going to tell you right now, the first priority for me would be school funding. I mean, school funding should be the priority, finding new ways to fund schools, not just with, taxes, finding new ways to provide our kids with, the resources that they need. And when I say resources, I'm not necessarily speaking about materials and computers. I mean, those things are important, but we are losing teachers. Teacher to student contact is so important. And, like right now, we are working with less basic skills teachers. We have less counselors. We have, programs and services that impact student learning have decreased over the years, and that's extremely concerning. I feel that, there is a high bar that we need to reach, but if we don't have the teachers in place to fulfill these needs, we're never going to get to where we need to be. And, that has an impact on classroom sizes. Right now, I have 24 students in my classroom, and you may think, oh, that's not a big number. Well, when you're teaching students how to read and write, at that young age, you need a lot of hands on deck. I have one basic skills teacher that services 5 grade levels. And, our students are coming in with, especially bilingual students who are coming from different countries. They come with different experiences, educational experiences. Some of them have interrupted schooling and have a lot of needs. And in the mainstream classrooms, we have a lot of more students who have special needs, who have other, economic needs that we as a school help them, overcome. We help our families as well financially with, different social programs that we have in our schools and our district. But I think school funding is to me, would be the first priority, to make sure that there's enough teachers to help our students and enough services to help them succeed.
Yeah, classroom size is really a civil rights issue.
Yes.
It is. One of those things that the federal, Secretary of the Federal Education Department should be prioritizing, not catering to billionaire donors. Lastly, Shirley, and we really appreciate you being on the show. What should people do now? I'm one of the things that I'm feeling good about in all of this drama is that I've never seen people so into politics and wanting to make a difference and get involved. Obviously, the education piece had a lot of us in the heart, whether you're an educator or a parent or someone that cares about the kids in our community. So if Shirley or people are out there, whether they're a parent or just someone that is really concerned about Betsy DeVos being the Secretary of Education and wants to do something about it, how would you suggest people get involved?
Well, first of all, I always think it's good to begin at the local level. So if you don't attend school board meetings, I think you should begin there. Also paying attention to the bills coming out of Congress. I know there's some service called governmenttrack.us, and you can sign up to get alerts. You can kind of prioritize what kind of alerts you want to get. So you can choose education, and you get all the alerts of all the new bills that are coming in or, coming out of committee. And, that way you can have that information at hand. Of course, continue to make phone calls to your senators, to your congressmen, to your local officials. I think there's so much you can do. I know a lot of people because, are feeling kind of the desire to turn off the TV because there's so much going on. And, I know people feel stressed out. I have felt that as well. But I think, we got to try to overcome that because this is not the time to ignore what's going on, especially in terms of the education of our students. And because everything is happening so fast, we have to be, we have to keep up with what's going on. And of course, read the newspaper, watch, news shows. Really, really get yourself informed and try to connect with other groups. I know because of this big movement, I had the opportunity to go to Washington and march with all these women, and it was just incredible. We are still keeping in touch.
That's right. You went to the Women's March. That's so
yes,
awesome.
I did, and it was an awesome experience, and I'm still connecting and taking some actions with this group in Cumberland County. And, I think that's what we need to do. We need to be vigilant. And, if you want to start little and want to start with your, Board of Education, if you have not been involved before, find out. Call your local board office. Find out when are the meetings and just show up and take a listen. And start there if you want to start with little steps. And then as you get comfortable, do all the other things. But definitely it's a time to remain, involved, reading, finding out. There's so many websites out there. Even the education website, from the Department of Education is one that perhaps we may look at. But, we don't know if things are going to mysteriously disappear. It has been happening with the other websites, as I hear,
That's right.
but www.ed.gov.
That's right.
So that's
and
that's what I would say.
And I want to remind people in terms of what's at stake for the country and our community.
Mm-hmm.
So, this, but then you get reminded when you hear it. A quarter of the students in public schools in this country are Latino kids. So whether you're Latino or not, a big part, instead of scaring each other and banning people that have nothing to do with violence and any of the issues happening in the world, we should be focused, like Shirley talked about how do we we get quality education to every child in this country so we don't have to outsource for engineers and doctors and IT specialists and we have plenty of talent here in our community. You go to the hood, kids are making computers out of, old radio parts. I mean, there's plenty of these kind of skills in our community. But they need the resources and that's what we should be focused on, not scaring each other so that we create this division and this chaos and stress. So, Shirley, thank you. Yes, please jump in. Any shout outs, any final thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say that, when it comes to running schools, I think one of the biggest issues that we have that is so politicized. And we have politicians making decisions for schools when it should be, bottom up. I think if teachers and people who have knowledge and education are the ones involved in these decision-making processes, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are now. If you look at other countries and the way how their systems are run, like Finland and all those other places where, you hear reports of how well the students are doing in comparison with United States, is because in their systems, teachers have a voice, teachers are involved, and, you have people running, the departments of education who have experience in education. And so, unfortunately,
qualified people for a job, Shirley. What are you talking about?
What a great,
that sounds so
idea, right?
That sounds 2015. Shirley Santos, let people know where they can find you on social media.
Oh, absolutely, on social media. Well, you can find me on Facebook. Shirley Santos is my name on Facebook. If you would like to have a chat with me, you can always email me at veashirleys@gmail.com. And, find a way to connect.
You're starting to get more engaged on Twitter, Shirley, which is good. So we need to.
Yes, that's true.
What's your Twitter handle? Do you remember off the top of your head what it is?
Oh, no, I don't.
It'll be in the show.
Santos,
it'll be in the show notes.
You'll find me.
No doubt. It'll be in the show notes. But
I'm
really appreciate it.
I'm not too social media savvy yet.
But that's a 2017. That's a 2017. What do you
goal.
Call it? A goal.
A
yeah,
goal.
We got to get you more involved in social media. Shirley, thank you so much. And the last thing I'll say to let people know that as impressive as this woman is, I want you all to understand this English is her second language. So this is a woman that's brilliant in many idiomas. So muchas gracias, Shirley. I look forward to seeing you. Next time we talk,
mi amor.
Okay. Igual,
all right. Thank you very much, and everyone, I hope you enjoy.
So as the day is winding down today, we got some good news. So the The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals out of San Francisco decided to continue to block President Trump's executive action by a 3-0 vote, continuing to block that Muslim ban executive order that President Trump signed, about 2 weeks ago. It seems like forever. Time's going by so fast. First of all, a victory for the checks and balances of our democracy, no question about it. A victory for good government, part of, and I'm not a lawyer, but part of what seems to be part of the decision-making process of these three judges, one of which was appointed by President Bush, is that they were trying to give the Justice Department lawyers an opportunity to sort of prove their case, and again, partially because of the sloppily written executive order, partially because seemingly lack of preparedness to some degree. They just were not able to do that. So for many, seems like there was many factors as it relates to the order and trying to prove your case. And of course the underlying issue, which is that, this man campaigned on a quote unquote Muslim ban, and then he writes an executive order banning people from 7 countries which happen to be Muslim dominant, which have never been a local terrorist issue. So these are victories, and in terms of the next steps, there's a high probability with his massive ego that President Trump will push this case to the Supreme Court, and that's why it's more important than ever that the Senate Democrats slow down, muck up the process, and make it as painfully long as possible to prevent the confirmation of President Trump's Supreme Court nominee, Neil Gorsuch, because indeed, if he were to be fast-tracked into the Supreme Court over the next 4 to 6 weeks, which is what the Senate Republicans would like to do, he very much could weigh in on this decision in a spring Supreme Court case. So, that's the next shoe to drop. So it relates to the Supreme Court nominees, and this proves more than ever that the resistance is working. And let's not fool ourselves. Whether it's, we're basically in a civil war right now. We are fighting not just to push back on repressive extreme right-wing policies, which manifest themselves in the cruelty of deporting people like Guadalupe Garcia, but really the sanctity of our democracy, whether it's the civil servants behind the scenes that are continuing to do the work in an ethical fashion under incredible pressure by the top of the administration, whether it's us grassroots leadership out here doing the right thing, making our voice heard, the judicial branch providing incredibly important, probably the last check we have because of the feckless Republican leadership in Congress. And, let's keep it real, the media to some degree, holding this man accountable, holding this administration accountable, doing the investigation and the research that we're skeptical that this new attorney general and other law enforcement officials within the administration would do as it relates to the very high probability and almost certain financial conflict of interest, because we've still never seen his taxes, and we won't until he's legally forced to hand them over. And what we can only imagine is happening as it relates to the deals that are being cut with Russia, and just a myriad of challenges and problems and ethical perils that this man is putting us through. But the resistance is working. Some good news again coming out of San Francisco and the Court of Appeals out there. And lastly, another good bit of news is that we learned hours ago that Puerto Rican political prisoner Oscar Lopez Rivera, who was, after 35 years, incarcerated by the federal prison system, was released actually early. President Obama granted him commuted his sentence, and it was announced initially he would be released in May, but he was released today. And we're getting word that he not only is back on the island of Puerto Rico, which he hasn't seen in decades, but that Congressman Luis Gutierrez was one of the leaders of the delegation that transported Oscar back to the island. So he was with family, he was with friends, he was with leaders that have worked on this issue for decades. So un orgullo, much respect to, we're so happy that Don Oscar is home, and for the thousands of activists around the Puerto Rican diaspora on the island and throughout the world that worked tirelessly for this man's release. So Oscar is home. So a bit of good news as we wrap up the week. Thank you so much for joining Ray's Talk Show. Again, you can catch this and all of our episodes on our podcast, Ray's Talk Show. Just look us up on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, anywhere you can catch a podcast, SoundCloud. Or you can check out all of our content at rayspodcast.com. That's RAYS podcast.com. I'm very active on Twitter at Ray's Podcast. That's the quickest way to get me. You can also email me at podcastrays@gmail.com. That's podcastrays@gmail.com. If you have a thought for a show, you want to just connect, I am definitely open to connecting with you and potentially having you join us in these conversations. You can catch me by my by my birth certificate name, Rafael Collazo, on Facebook, and I frequently do Facebook Lives. So definitely we can connect on many media. And again, I want to thank two great advocates and friends, Patricia Campos and Shirley Santos, for joining me on this edition of Ray's Talk Show. Have a great weekend. Keep the resistance up. It's working, y'all. We're going to be stronger from all this, for sure. Nos vemos.